This tutorial is a little bit different in nature. So I kind of came to the conclusion that I think there's a lot of value in showing my art process. I guess it's more of an art process video. I did a couple of these a few years ago, and I want to do more of them, as I think it will allow me to upload consistently and allow me to provide value without having to force a tutorial out of myself that's made just for the sake of it. So I had this idea for a render for a while, at least in this shape of composition, and I tried to make something similar the other day with some Diet Coke cans, and I wasn't really vibing with it, so I thought I would try this Xbox model that I have lying around. Straight away, I ripped it out of another scene, put it in a new scene, and you're going to see quite quickly how quick I shaped the composition, and that is because I had attempted something very similar the other day. And I'm going to really try and discuss everything I'm thinking about, although I'm working a little bit quickly because you're seeing my natural workflow. I'm going to be able to tell you what I'm thinking, the order that I work through things in. When you make a tutorial, it's really only 20% of that true workflow and pipeline when you're making a render. So much of it gets eliminated through refining the process to make it a strict 20-30 minute kind of guideline to getting a result. And I think seeing the raw format in which a render is made is really valuable. So you can see quite quickly, I drop in the model, I set up the camera, and then I add my shadows and I add my background. So I really try to set up my scenes in Octane like this, where I have multiple different skies as our shadows are bound to the environment in Octane. I try to set up different skies, one that represents the shadows and one that represents the background, setting it to visible environment. And then I may drop in a HDRI in the middle, which would replace the shadow primary environment somewhere along the line. So very quickly, I set everything up in terms of the camera imager, get that out of the way. It's so responsible for whether a render is going to look nice. You can light all you want, but if your camera imager isn't set up correctly, you're not going to see a whole image. And I'm just throwing lights down on the scene. Thankfully, it's quite an easy object to light. I'm just doing, one light on the left and trying to get a bit of a backlight. And you're going to see over this process, you're going to see the render change a lot. And I think that's really, really vital to remember. I think so many people get caught up in the base idea of their render, the idea that they come to the composition with and that they try to confront. And one thing I try to tell people a lot, especially coaching people, is that a huge amount of the art process is exploration and letting the render almost guide you along the way a little bit. Things change a lot, and your idea, I believe, although sometimes it can come to fruition, should really only be used as a placeholder to get you started and to get you moving, and then kind of allocating yourself to drastically take different directions along the way and see where it ends up. And you're going to see, even by the thumbnail, this is a pretty different render. What I started with was okay, but I just wanted to go for something a little bit more out there. So right now I've kind of got the scene set up. I've put in some lights. There's an okay looking render. I've put the gradient in the background. Now I'm looking for Megascans. I wanted to put some sort of concrete texture on the cube that the Xbox is sitting on. I ended up not really gelling with many of them, and I go back and forth with them quite a bit. So you would have seen this in a few of my tutorials, the way I set up Megascans. I usually bring them in and then I clean them up a lot. So this is me just saving the file. So you'll see me doing this a lot with Megascans, cleaning them up, laying them out. Megascans, you have to make quite a few edits to make them look nice, and typically I just clean them all up and I color correct them and I put box projection on them and UV map them and then edit all of that. So you can see here, just add that texture projection, plug them all in. Really wish Octane had a button to just auto plug your texture projection into every image texture that you have in a material. And then I mess with the scale, and you can see the displacement. It's not looking great on the edges, so then I'm gonna compensate by bringing down the mid level. It's one thing you always have to watch out for when you're putting Megascans on objects that have edges, or at least Megascan surfaces, and then desaturate it. Now, it's probably not till about half an hour in that this scene really takes a turn, and then I start getting faced with a lot of issues due to the kind of complexity of the scene and the way I have the lights set up. And I probably shot myself in the foot a little bit because I created the lights for this composition, and then I do change them, but not tons. So right now I'm still very much in the headspace that I want this render with a low down camera view looking up at the Xbox, and I'm going to try and set up some gobos on it. And this is a nice render, and I might go back to it, some of the early scene files as I save incrementally, and still use it, as it ends up totally different by the end. So I seem to remember where my head's at right now is I was getting very irritated with the tiling, and I couldn't really be bothered to put in a huge amount of effort to get rid of that, using chaos nodes and whatnot. So I was really just trying to play with it and get rid of it. This is me putting in noise. I do that again a lot with Megascans. Adds a little bit of extra spice, a little bit of detail, a little bit of sharpness. So I tend to plug in the noise, simplify it, solo it, scale it down, and then I'll plug that same noise into the roughness and control it with the gamma to get some sort of sparkles. It tends to be how I do those black rock materials that are on my Instagram a lot. There is a tutorial on my Patreon for that. And I tend to duplicate the noise. I mean, you could get the same effect just using a gradient on the noise into the roughness, but I tend to duplicate it just so I have that extra control available if I did want to change more. And you can see I'm just messing with the colors of it and whatnot. Nothing too exponential going on here. I definitely think I will go back to this render, and or at least this version of the scene file, and render something out. This part, a little bit boring right now, just me messing with materials. But I think it's vital to see what I'm going over and what I'm thinking about. And I think I also, I was aware that I wanted to just record this as I was making it so I could talk over it and see what I could speak about as I was making it. And this was largely actually what was responsible for pulling me away from this first idea. Was it felt very simple, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing something that exhibited a lot of thought and a lot of changes, and also something that gave myself a lot of issues. So you can see that as I do refine my process so much when it comes to the YouTube tutorials, I think being able to see me in sticky situations is really useful. And if you watch so many tutorials, you miss out on so many problems, and then you come away back to your renders and you're facing so many issues that you haven't seen in the tutorial. And I think it's really good to know that every artist, we're all going through the same stuff. We're all crashing and having trouble with things and going back and forth a million times on different ideas. So already now my mind's bugging out a little bit, and I'm like, okay, I want to change this a little bit. And it takes a little while for me to accept that I want to change it. Another thing you're noticing as well is that when I'm lighting, I do this a lot in my tutorials. I first learned it from one of Andrei Lebrov's tutorials like 5 years ago, that you can press F2, F3 or F4 and change the camera back to perspective, and then you can light in your scenes while still having the Octane Live Viewer show you your main camera, which is really giving you a lot more quality over the way that you're lighting, because you're seeing the effect that your lights have in your scene in real time. If you're having to come out your camera and move your lights around, you probably might end up with a working camera or something, and it's very unnecessary. Being able to see the way your lights are being changed in real time on real effect on your real composition is a much slicker way to work. So now I've went back on the Megascan, I've decided I hate it, so I'm thinking, okay, I'll grab another one, and I'm just going around looking for another one. And I think I wanted something more plastery, and I did end up actually kind of liking this one, but I still didn't stick with it. And somewhere along the way here, and this was really good, and this is something I want to go over as well. So like shortly, in a couple of minutes, I crashed the scene. Just typical Cinema 4D crash. No, I think it was an Octane crash actually, but it's usually Octane that crashes Cinema. So the crash pulled me out of my headspace a little bit. You get very trapped in making endless changes and trying to push the scene file into something that you like. And I think sometimes it's good to be kind of grateful for a crash, because it put me in the headspace that, okay, you know what, I was in a bit of a loop, working endlessly with ideas that I didn't really like. And it kind of gave me a bit of a reset, man. I was like, okay, right, I'm going to do something different now. I'm going to chase a different direction. And just having that moment to breathe, when I was letting cinema close itself down and reopen the scene file, really allowed me to reorientate. So sometimes I don't think it's the worst thing in the world when you're, all I'm doing here, even if I was to get myself back to the place, because I didn't save it or anything, I think the only thing I had left was the lights. Getting myself back to this place, if it was just setting up this material again, because I had done the experimentation, would have only took a couple of minutes. But sometimes I think, it's really valuable to just say, okay, I'm gonna take this in a different direction. I wasn't liking where it was going. There's no point trying to get back there, and there's no point going into that same phase of experimentation. One thing I catch people doing a lot as well is not working in the node editor. If you want to make any kind of decent material and have a lot of control over your material, you need to be working in the node editor, even for simple things. You want to make sure you're always working in the node editor. As scary as it is at first, it's so valuable, and learning node workflows is very important among lots of software. So you can see I just made another camera there, and I always build my compositions with the subject matter in the center of the world. It's going to make it a lot easier for you to create composition. It's going to give you a lot of shortcuts and almost create your composition for you in most instances. If you have a messy scene and the coordinates are very scrambled, you're certainly going to have issues. And being able to create a camera and zero out the coordinates but keep the Z coordinates so your camera's far back in space is definitely neat scene construction. And especially when you're bringing other assets into the scene or animating, especially animating, things are going to become a lot more simple for you. So at this point I gave up on the actual image texture, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to plug in my own RGB spectrum to try and get color I want. Still wasn't liking it. I think I crash in a couple of minutes now. And this whole render took me just over an hour. There's the crash. And everything closes and I have to get back into the scene. So I ended up sitting on my phone for a couple of minutes. You always get that little bit of an energy dip after you crash the scene. So yeah, this whole render took me about just over an hour. Probably would have been shorter if the idea I ended up with was my first idea. Again, you see I always work with Octane on the left side of the viewport as well. I think a lot of the reason I don't keep it on my second monitor is I really got used to working with it all on the same screen just for tutorials. But I also always just gelled with having it on the left the most, and I don't think your viewport really has to be that big unless you're modeling. So work quite well with that 50-50 split between the viewport on the right and the Octane live viewer on the left. You always see my live viewer is locked as well. So I always set my composition usually to 2K in a square, if I'm making a render like this at least. So 248 by 248. And I always lock the live viewer as well, because that's going to give you your true resolution. You're going to be working in the highest quality. And you're going to see in real time how your render is going to look. And you're going to be able to zoom into it. So you always want to make sure you're locking your live viewer. Here I'm just setting my render settings. I do the same things all the time. 248 samples, put 8 on everything, set the GI clamp to 10. And then I usually make the sample rates of my lights 248 as well. Again, you just make them the same number so they have the same importance. That's above 1, you set them both to 10, set them both to 100, set them both to 1000, doesn't really matter. I just do 248, so I'm typing in the same numbers a lot. Now I think I was trying to just darken the material a little bit, because I knew I wasn't really gelling with the Megascans, but the white felt really blown out, so I was just trying to mess with it a little bit. But you're going to see me start taking different directions now, and I start doing some different things to the model that aren't really on the real product. So I'll speak about that when I start doing it. So here's me trying to light with the Gobo now. You can see typical Gobo stuff. You set it to box, add in your transform, mess with the scale. And I'm going to have to make the light a lot smaller to then entice sharper shadows and then bring up the power. So you usually get Gobo to look nice. So I think I jack up the power quite a lot. And I end up quite liking the way this looks, and it actually stays in the scene. The same light in Gobo, and this light stays till the end. Although I don't end up gelling with this current composition. I think that does look quite cool, especially in hindsight, looking back at it. It's very easy to hate your renders when you're making them, and then sometimes you look back and you think, oh, actually, that was quite good. I actually quite like that. And I get quite a nice, I wanted that diagonal shadow, and it ends up going quite nice over the top corner of the Xbox as well, just there. But of course, a lot of the issues with Gobos can be that, you know, you want to mix other lights with it, which then is going to mean that you're going to need light IDs because the other lights are going to destroy the shadows. So you're going to see me doing that now. Add an Octane object tag to the cube, set the highlight lights to 2 to different light IDs, and then turn it off in the cube so I can put my highlights back on the Xbox without affecting the shadows. So now I'm trying to get some highlights back in the front as well, so I'm doing the same thing again, same light ID. Because I really like that like disc tray highlight along the bottom of the disc tray, and I think that helps the model pop a lot. So I was really trying to stay on top of that and keep that there. I think now I'm starting to go into materials a little bit, so I wanted to add some glow to the logo, and I believe I had it in there from using the model in the past. So just go in and add that, and then some weird thing happens where it thinks that material is on the rubber like placements of the console, and I start getting a bit irritated with the selection tags because it won't go away. And this is me, I actually just fixed it there, but I had to resend Octane to get Octane to update. Octane does this a lot. It just bugged out and was not showing me updates, so then I still thought there was a problem when there wasn't. So I think that's really good practice to just resend your scene, because sometimes you have actually fixed what's causing the issue, but because you're not seeing it in the live viewer, you're getting irritated. I mean, I was reading it, I was looking at the material, I was seeing that the selection tag was correct, but the live viewer was saying different, and I was at a bit of a loss. And then I was like, oh, I tell you what, I know what's going on. I'm just going to resend the live viewer. And it fixed itself. And that goes for, you know, a lot of problems in general in creating renders, is once you get good enough at a certain software or a certain render engine, you're going to kind of have a bit of a, a bit of a Rolodex of most of the issues you're going to run into on your day-to-day workflow, especially if you have a consistent workflow and you have a consistent way of creating things. You're going to end up with this itinerary of knowing what tends to go wrong. And then you're going to have a bit of a list, and when something's not going your way or you have a problem, you're going to be able to mentally run through that list and check all the problems. So, okay, right there, I was like, okay, I know it's the selection tags. Okay, let me check the material. Okay, it's still not this. And it only took me about maybe 30 seconds to a minute of going back and forth with it to realize, oh, okay, I need to resend the scene because Octane is being annoying. So, you know, once you get comfortable with those problems, I feel like a lot of issues, the doors to a lot of issues seem to close, and you end up working through problems a little bit quicker, and you understand it's just a part of the process, and then they're always going to happen. So now this is where the scene begins to take a turn, and I think this is where I start attempting to take a different composition. I still, looking back, I still do really like this render, and I definitely think I will go back to it. So you'll probably see this render on my Instagram soon enough. I don't think it's long before I ditch the cube for a plane and trying to make some big changes. And I kept trying to turn the Xbox as well. I thought it might catch more light, but then I thought, in terms of composition, I think having the Xbox completely centered, at this stage at least, got a very slick look to it. I think if it turns, it just looks a little bit out of place against the cube. You've got very flowing lines here. If you look at the lines of the composition, you've got those, they're almost like perspective lines between, you look at the top of the Xbox and the cube. All those lines are going one direction, and then you've got all the vertical lines. So I think having, at least at this angle, the Xbox straight creates a nice flow in the composition, where a lot of your lines are all going in the same direction and following each other. So next up on the agenda, you see I try to put a plane in the background. Doesn't last very long. This was something I was doing with the first scene I tried the other day with the cola cans. but I actually did it there to get some light bounces. So I was turning off the visibility of it, or turning down the opacity of it in the viewport, but then getting the light bounces from it still. And I think there was some good potential here, but it didn't last very long. Now I'm thinking about adding a higher up camera, which means I have to increase the scale of the cube, increase the width of it, and the length. But now I'm seeing issues with the limitations of the light gobo. I have to move that back, which you'll see me do in a second, and I'm just checking which light is causing that white highlight in the top left. So you'll see me just turn a couple of the lights on and off just to troubleshoot it and see which light is causing that. And then I find it's the gobo. So if I turn off all the other lights, it stays there. So it's just a simple solution, just move it back, and that clears up nearly instantly. And you're going to see this issue staying a lot, is that light bounce under the bottom of the Xbox. That's coming from the second highlight light. Although, in fact, before I say that, what I'm doing right now is I thought it would be cool, because we all wished that the Xbox Series X, instead of painted lines on the top, had a glow, had a light. So I thought, well, I'm making a render so I can do that. And it came out really well, but at first, so on this model, there was a plane underneath the holes that had the emission material on it. I ended up having to move that plane up a little bit to get the light to show correctly, because at this angle currently, it was very strangely tapered. So it doesn't take me long to attempt that. But this is really the turning point now to me taking the scene into where we saw it in its final form. So I moved the camera up a little bit more, and I'm still not happy with just the glow. Looks really fragmented and strange, and I wanted like a smooth gradient going outwards. I realized quite quickly that that must be because of the way in which the glow is built. So I get a top look here, and I start looking, and I'm seeing that different parts of it have different strengths. So I just go and find that selection tag, and I see it's just a plane. So I remedy that, and moving it up a little bit was a very quick solution. So you can see once I find that, I just move it up a little bit, just ever so slightly below all the holes. And then when I go back in the camera, now it looks really cool and even. So I was really happy with that. And another thing I was mentioning before, the light bounces in the bottom right side of the Xbox. This is an issue you encounter a lot if you use a light gobo or you have a shadow and then you're adding other highlights that are coming from light IDs. So although that we don't have that light responding to the cube, the light bounces still will. So depending on your light, you can get around this by maybe making it show on the specular but not the diffuse. And you can do some little tricks with that. I'll go into that more as you see me handling with the problem, because I don't like it and it does look a little bit unrealistic. Here's me, I also just tried to mess with a green light. It didn't stay for very long, but it did look cool while it lasted, I suppose. You're going to see my main issues in the scene are dealing with that light bounce. And I've just set up a wide camera angle here. Something I always tend to do. Set up a different render setting and set up a wide angle. As I usually like to render multiple out of the scene. And then, you kind of end up balancing your scene a little bit between the two. If your scene only works in one composition, sometimes that's not the best. So having two is usually quite a good idea, I find. But yeah, when you look, that just glow underneath the Xbox just takes you out of things a little bit. So that's something we always want to try and avoid. Make sure that our lighting is consistent and there's not bugs like that. But for the most part, you will see me working in the square composition. And I don't think we're far away now from me changing the scene entirely and getting rid of the cube and working towards having that final scene with the Megascans. So it starts off with me adding in asphalt materials on the ground. But again, the scene felt very flat and very empty. And I just wanted something that was a little bit busy and that had something going on. Sometimes I love creating renders that don't have a lot going on. I think being really minimalist in your compositions is quite important, and learning what you need and what you don't need and what's clutter and what you're putting in because you feel like you need to have it in versus what you're putting in because you are understanding that that's got a valuable opportunity to add a lot to the render. And I certainly remember back to when I was less experienced, I always felt like I needed more. And I always felt like I needed more in the scene, and I needed more objects, because it never felt like enough. And when I look back to a lot of my earlier renders, there's a lot of pointless cubes and circles randomly sitting there. And then that was a lot of the design kind of style at the time, back in, 2016, 17, and 18. Everybody was very big on just putting random spheres in the scene, or skulls and astronauts. But I really found my footing as an artist when I dialed everything back and just focused on what's important. And that's one of the things I do a lot with my coaching students, is I start them way back at stage 1. So let's start simple. If you can't light a model, you can't make that model look good, you don't need to worry about putting anything else in the scene right now. If you can't place a camera properly, if you can't use your takes, if you can't render, put proper render settings, you don't need to worry about building big scenes. You need to focus on accumulating a workflow that allows you to drive a render to a final stage, and keeping everything in simple form. And that leads all the way, in terms of not even just having a lot of lights, a lot of objects in the scene, that goes into lighting too. You don't need nearly as many lights as you think you do. And I see that issue with people all the time. They have so many lights. It's rare you need more than 3 or 4 lights. Most of my scenes have 2. Some of my scenes have 1. A lot of the time you can get away with using a couple of lights and a HDRI to get more reflections, or to get more hotspots. So you can see now, just as I was chatting, that I have now put a plane in the scene, and this stays till the end now. So I just wanted to take a little bit of a break from the tutorial and promote my coaching and see if I could be a good fit to help you with your renders. Over the last year and a half, I've been coaching numerous people, and I've built out this entire coaching platform. There's a bunch of modules, working through them, making you recreate my renders, not letting you progress until you perfect those renders. This is really for people that are struggling to build a consistent workflow, struggling to understand what they're doing wrong, struggling to get the same results each time, and be able to predict the quality that the output of their renders are going to have. But one thing I noticed over coaching so many people and doing a lot of discovery calls and seeing if I would be a good fit for certain people is that a lot of people were a little bit too experienced for this main coaching that I built. So if you fall into that bracket, you can see here, there's a button, and I did create an offer. I now offer new coaching, which is more for advanced people, where we work on your renders specifically. We get on calls for about an hour every week, or multiple times a week if that's what you want, and we go over your work, see if I can help bring things to life, help you with certain workflows, help you with certain things, and seeing how I can help improve your work. So if you fall into either of these brackets, then book a call and we'll see if we'd be a good fit. And the other thing, of course, is my Patreon. I've been making tutorials on Patreon for about a year now, and I've been making a lot more advanced tutorials, various different tutorials. So if you want to go check my tutorials out over there, then definitely go check them out. Lots of cool stuff, lots of lighting stuff, material stuff, nature stuff, tons of different things over here. I'm just messing with the light scale a little bit of the Gobo light to try and get a little bit more power out of it. Rather than bringing up the power, I'm just opening up the scale a little bit while trying to retain the sharpness of the shadows, just to get a bit more of a powerful light. And I don't think I mess with this for too long until I start making big changes by adding in the Megascans. But I know before that happens, I get in a fight with this highlight. A lot of it actually came down to the roughness of the material and the specularity of the material, causing a lot of those glossy light bounces back. Here I'm just editing the material, but I was getting quite irritated with it, and you're going to see another problem that comes with it as well. So now I believe I'm turning off the lights to see which is causing it. So I find which light is causing it, and then you're going to see me doing a whole bunch of things. I even try adding fall off. So the first thing I do is try to turn it off on the diffuse. It seems to work a little bit, but then there's this green light underneath it, which seems to be coming from the emission, which is very strange because the emission is at the top of the model. And I start having a look at the selection tags, and you can see that little green line down there. And I thought that that was coming off the Xbox. And I was looking at the selection tags, and I was going around it, and I realized it wasn't coming from the selection tags. There genuinely was no emission up the top. So I still don't really know how this was being caused. It came down to it being the displacement on the material. The displacement on the ground material was some reason catching these green hotspots. And I ended up getting it fixed, but it took me a while to realize that. So this is me playing with the selection tags now to try and suss that out and make sure that there's no glow sitting down the bottom of the model. I'm having a good old look to make sure. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, I think it's good to see these problems and see somebody working through them and encountering things. I was certainly, I don't know if I was frustrated, but it was certainly bugging me. And I thought it might be that long, small bit that was causing it, but it wasn't. Just that bit of geometry you saw in the live viewer there. I end up coming back to this numerous times to try and fix it. The problem did persist for quite a while, and it was probably this that added a lot of time to creating the render. Sometimes I create a render really, really quick. Sometimes it take me 2 hours, 3 hours. I mean, this was still relatively quick. It was about 1 hour and 8 minutes. But I always think, without those problems, without looking out for all those issues, how quick would it have took? I mean, if I just stayed with that base scene with the cube and the white in the white background, probably would only took me 15 minutes. But now I'm using a bit of a render region, but try and see what's going on with it. I checked the emission, saw that it was indeed the emission showing up. And I don't have total awareness right now that a lot of it is the material. I'm very fixated on it being the light. But here was a solution I attempted here. I thought, okay, if it's the light causing the light bounce and the green glow, how about I try and get highlight with a HDRI instead? Because the HDRI won't cause light bounce. Or at least not to the same extent. I don't even know if it would. But I was trying to get that rim light on the back. I couldn't get it. I was getting quite irritated. I could only really get these lights on the top, which I ended up keeping. But I was really hoping that I would be able to use it to get the backlight. And I go through about 3 different HDRIs and I still can't get it. So I just end up leaving it. So I'm still quite irritated with the glow. But over the next kind of 10 minutes, this is where you're going to see the scene take a really rapid shift. And back to what I was saying at the beginning about letting your ideas drive you into exploration and let your idea take your hand a little bit and relinquish control and just let something come to you. That's where your best work's always going to come from. I don't think our ideas are as responsible for the final output as we think, as much of the final output as we think it is. Relinquishing that control and just letting your workflow take you along the way. Once you're in the mud, once you're in the trenches, and you're in there making something, you're going to be faced with opportunities, decisions, and new ideas along the way. You can't comprehend those ideas when you come up with one idea for a render. So I always think it's good just to get started and just start making something. Because as you get faced with those new ideas, new opportunities, problems, things that are going to swing you in different directions, you nearly always end up with something that you couldn't have even pictured in your mind before. And I really like that way of getting to a final result. And I think it's good to not be too attached to your ideas as well. I don't think our ideas are often as good as we think they are. It's very hard to take an idea from your mind and print it directly onto your composition. Right now, I'm still trying to figure out what on earth is causing that glow. Like I said, a lot of it comes down to the material. I try messing with the hot pixels. Hot pixel removal is great. You never want to go too low because I don't think it muds out your image as much as it used to. Back in the day, it used to really mud out your image, similar to the denoiser. But it doesn't do it so much anymore, I find. Maybe it's because I work in higher resolutions now, just for having more graphic power. But it certainly made a bit of a difference, not as much as I would have liked. So you can see I really am wasting, well, not wasting, but I'm spending a lot of time working through this one problem because I was persistent in having the glow, but I wasn't giving up on those highlights on the Xbox. So, to be fair, it looks alright. Maybe I should have just gave up trying to get that highlight in the back. I think for a moment, I even go back to the cube, see how that looks again. So again, you can really see, I don't know if doubt is the right word, but you can really see my mind fluctuating a lot. I don't know where my destination is. I don't know where I want to end up. I think, you know, sometimes you can see people that post a lot of renders and you think that wow, they must never struggle, they must never go back and forth, they must never doubt their work. But no, like, you really see me just in the trenches, not knowing what I want to do or where I want to go. And, you know, I'm just deep in a flow state, just making changes. I'm not even thinking about what changes I'm making. There's probably a little bit of, you know, forebrain thinking there about what am I going to do next. But, you know, so much of it here is just, I'm on automatic mode. I'm just like, I'm cruise controlling through it. And through the habit of making hundreds of renders, you know, all, you know, I've probably made thousands of renders. But, you know, you end up just getting into a habit of knowing what changes to make when. It's almost subconscious. You almost get a feeling for what needs to be different rather than thinking about what could I change. It's more of a feeling. Things just sort of get changed. It's very interesting. But I also think it's good to know, to be able to make the decision that this is done. I don't need to keep changing this. I think that's really important to be able to do. So now the final lighting is beginning to shape itself up a little bit. I think you can see for the most part I have gotten rid of that glow now. Or is it still there? Can't quite see. But a lot of it comes down to, like I said, the material. And when I end up changing the material to a new one, it's pretty much gone. You can see I can quite quickly, due to the way my scene's built, get back to that first version of the scene really quick. And I even consider going back to it. Like I said, you can really see me going back and forth. I have no clue where I want to take it. I think it's over the next couple of minutes that I decide I'm done with it. And that final scene shapes up. You see, that there looks really good. I should probably render that. It's really interesting as well that you spend, you know, 45 minutes getting a scene to a good place. Or to an okay place. And then you spend the next 10 minutes changing it radically and end up creating 90% of the scene, of the final look, within about 10 minutes. It's so funny that that's how it happens, you know, 9 times out of 10. So I think this is where I pull in the Megascans. So I just go to Megascans, I see these rocks. I think, okay, they'll look cool. When you see those rocks that have a lot of sharp edges, when you have sharp lighting, you're going to get really, really nice shapes. They're going to look really cool. And I put one in, I just immediately know, okay, that's going to look sick. So I think in the nature of the scene, I desaturate it, make it white, create something a little bit abstract. And I get a good look very quickly. And then it's just a matter of placing them. I probably could have went for a bit more variation. I did just use the one Megascan and move it about. Yes, but it was this one here. And I felt the cluster of them is it's good as well, because so many times if you bring in one rock, you're then faced with the trouble of creating a composition out of that and creating a formation and making sure they're not colliding and putting them all around each other. But when you have like a formation like that, like a cluster, they're all stuck together and it's a real formation that's been scanned, and you end up getting a nice look really quickly. You don't have anything that looks unnatural because of it. I think that's really useful. So sometimes it's good to lean into those clusters. I thought that crashed then. I remember panicking, but it was just the Megascan complaining, which it seems to do all the time. So immediately I see the way the light's being hit on that, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is going to work. So I have a little think about how I want to place it. I go into the material here, and I do my classic Megascan cleaning. Mess with the displacement, get that turned on. Always hate that the displacement channel isn't turned on by default with the Megascan models. Seems to be on the surfaces, but not the models. And I feel like that looks okay, so start out, place some behind the Xbox. I accidentally moved the camera on the live viewer, which was annoying. I don't know how to undo that if you move it in the live viewer. Control-Shift-Z doesn't work. But doesn't take any time at all to move the camera back. So then I make the objects a be the light IDs in the scene. And then I just start creating some different stuff. And the way that looks there, I'm just like, okay, game on, man. Okay, here we go. This looks good. And it's weird watching it back as well, because in hindsight, it would have looked cool with like less rocks. Like just a couple of rocks around it might have looked really cool as well. So I'll probably go create some variations of this scene. But as soon as I place these couple, I'm going to have the Xbox engulfed by the rocks. I put some bigger ones behind it, and thanks to the shadows, these all sort of fade away, which looks really cool. I end up placing more around just in case there is any information there, any light information that there is rocks there. And at that point I do instance them. I don't do instances much because I mess with the scales a lot, but when I know I'm going to keep something, I kind of know I kind of have a sixth sense of when to use an instance rather than duplicating the object. So I'm back to messing with the lights a little bit in the material. I end up going for a really similar rock material. I try to make this first material, the asphalt, that had white, but I don't like it. And I end up going with a material that's very similar to the surface of the rocks. And that ends up looking really nice, but I end up getting quite irritated with it because there's a lot of displacement. I ended up getting in a bit of a battle trying to make sure that it's on a smooth surface and that the rocks themselves sit nicely against it. So I've got that material in there now, messing with it. It's on the model. And classic stuff, mess with the scale of it. And once I bump up the displacement and I get a good feel for it, I know that it is the one. I know it's the one I'm going to keep. And it's really once I bring down the color that I vibe with it. But even just seeing it there, it's getting hit by the light the same way the rocks are. And to be honest, looking back on it, I probably should have just left it there. The way it looked there with the Xbox in the shadows. That probably looked better. But I got drove out of this a little bit because if you see that rock on the right side and you can see the white line where it's colliding with the main material I have, the floor material, I get very irritated by those lines connecting with each other. And I don't like that you can see that and that you can light it. Like, I ended up becoming a bit of a perfectionist about it because a lot of it just came to matching the gamma of both the materials, but you can see my attention going on it a little bit. And I'm making sure that maybe I could just get a contact shadow or something. To be honest, that probably looked okay. It's weird looking at it back because when I was making it, I was like, this is not okay. I need to fix this now. Like, what am I going to do? And I end up playing with this material a lot. So what I do is I put a plane underneath the Xbox just so I have a reference to see exactly where the Megascan needs to sit in the live viewer. And I'm just bumping it with the mid-level. And then you can see those like bits of rock just stabbing through the Xbox. And then end up moving it, just going back and forth with the tons. And I think it's shortly I mess with the gamma and get rid of that white highlight. I believe this was actually the same Megascan that I used on my Alexa renders. It's interesting how much of a different look you can get. And I actually used this same Megascan in my tutorial on my Patreon, which you should subscribe to, absolutely. Although I have been a bit inconsistent posting content, trying to really find my footing with it. And I assume that a lot of people are waiting for when there's just a truckload of tutorials. But I have made a lot of tutorials there this year, and between that and making tutorials for coaching, I've made over about 70 tutorials this year, which is nearly the entire amount that's on my channel in the last 5 years. And unfortunately, I've only made like 4 or 5 tutorials on my actual channel, but I've been making a lot of stuff between Patreon and coaching. But now I'm ready to focus on YouTube again. I miss it. I miss it a lot. I'm trying to figure out ways that I can stay as consistent with that as possible. It's really difficult to find the time to come up with a tutorial a week when I have clients, people to coach, Patreon tutorials to think about. I think as long as I've got a weekly upload, that provides some sort of value. I think most people will be happy with that. I think now I turn my attention back to that contact point. Getting very annoyed with it. Moving it up and down. And I probably couldn't get a contact shadow because the bottom of the Megascans are hollow. In hindsight, if I probably just lifted that up and closed the polygon hole, probably would have got the contact shadow that I was looking for. But the gamma fixes it anyway, so it's not much of an issue. Just make that a little bit whiter and it's gone. It's a nice and simple fix. And this is really the final scene. I just keep making general tweaks, trying to make sure that, again, the Xbox looks smooth on the bottom. And then I start messing with the lighting, which I probably didn't need to do. But it's strange, like once you start a scene and you're not having much luck with it, and you don't like where it starts, so you end up whipping it in a different direction. It's kind of hard to get out the shadow of the doubt. You're kind of stuck messing with things, and you almost seem like every change you make you're unhappy with. But nonetheless, I got to something that I really liked. And it was a good render. I messed with the camera angles a little bit as well. So you can see me instancing. I've got the instances there. I did that a couple of minutes ago. So I have a look at it when it's wide. And I'm really just making sure the composition is even. You know, you got those rocks in the bottom right, but then you got nothing on the right. You just got a black spot. Probably looks okay. But I like to make sure that everything's really evened out and there's not any hot spots of objects. And I like to make sure that your eyes are being funneled in to what's important. That's something I try to do a lot. I think it's really good to think of your composition as, you know, a suction. You want everything to be drove to that middle point where your object is, whether that, even if your object's off to the right or the left a little bit, everything needs to be conducive to getting the viewer's eyes to that subject matter. And I think that's important about, you know, when I'm teaching people to make renders, to start off small and to start off simple. Because if you don't understand how to focus on what's important and make people focus on that, you're going to have a tricky time with your render. And it's never going to gel very well. And I think that's something that's very subconscious for me now, is learning to direct the viewer's eye straight to where I want it to be. You know, you have other artists that work completely different. You know, that sculpt every single little part of the image, and every part has got detail and something to look at. I'm not like that. I like strong subject matter, not much subject matter, and I like to push people's eyes towards it. And I think that creates quite a satisfying image to look at. And it creates a consistent look. You know, this is another thing as well that I wanted to speak about when I was making this, is that creating renders is really important to get yourself to a point where, although as an artist, sometimes, a lot of the time, and you need to understand this, that every time you make a render, sometimes you're not going to like it. Sometimes you're going to fall flat. Sometimes you're going to make a render and it's just not going to work. It's just not going to come out the way you want it to. And that's okay. That's a part of being an artist. But when you get to the point that even when your ideas fall flat, they still retain the same quality, they still retain the same look, and they still look like they're made by you, that's important. Not all your ideas are going to come out great. But when you get to the point where even your ideas that you're not enjoying still retain the same quality, I think that you know that your skill set is in a valuable place and that you have a lot to offer as an artist. Because effectively, even though your ideas might not always come through for you, you always have the ability to make something look good. And I think that's important. So you can see a couple of minutes ago I was making changes to the lighting and I was changing a lot of things. I'm adding in more rocks. I'm seeing how different rocks look. I've added in more rocks on the right now, which definitely looks good. You don't have that blank spot. And one thing I did wish I changed after I posted this, I had a look. You see the rocks on the left, just in front of the disc tray. I don't like the way they're angled up at the Xbox. I think they could have been at a different angle, kind of pointing away from the Xbox. I think the way they're falling into it doesn't look as good. And you see the rocks on the right, they're all kind of leaning to the right. And then the rocks on the left are leaning to the right. I think if the rocks on the left lean to the left, you would have got more of that circular motion around the rocks that are surrounding the object, and that probably would have looked a bit nicer. But this is weird for me, watching myself back, creating a render, seeing different things and being able to talk about it with a different mindset. It's interesting. And I seem to be getting glimpses here of a bit of clipping from the mid-level. I don't think it was, because when I changed the mid-level, it didn't seem to change. But I just end up messing, I seem to mess with this floor a lot. And in the last little bit I get messed up with, well, not messed up with, but I end up changing, is I get caught up trying to get my highlights again on the Xbox. I get obsessed with trying to get highlights on it. But I put some back in on the left again. But I probably will cut this part down a little bit, because it doesn't really change. I'm just playing. The final render is pretty much there now, and I end up leaving it for the most part. I just go into some lighting changes and camera changes and composition changes. You notice as well, I have turned I don't think I turned the Xbox, but I turned the camera. You see the way my camera is, you see that little white cross? The crosshair is directly on the center line of the Xbox. Again, that's automatically creating quite a satisfying composition. I think once you learn to obey little laws like that, the laws of composition, your alignment, your negative area, things like that, like everything gets so much more neat, and it gets really quick, and you get in the habit of creating that, which creates a really flattering image. I think you end up learning to do it with the shapes of your object as well. And focal length is so important in renders as well. Generally, renders look better with much higher focal lengths, 100 and above. Going lower in renders, you can get away with 70 or 80 sometimes, especially if you need something to be in a realistic perspective. You don't want to create a render of a skateboard. I did this once. Create a render of a skateboard and use 300 millimeters, and it looks really short and stubby. So sometimes it's definitely important. But I think if you're quite new to renders, or you're struggling to get to a point where you feel like you're making good renders, jacking up your focal lengths a lot can do a lot for just making your renders look a lot better very quickly. As you can see there, I just messed with that light, pushed it to try and get that highlight, and I've got it there, and I'm messing with the HDRI. And I'm probably going to wrap this up here. It's about another 20 minutes of playing. There's probably about 15 minutes of rendering and setting off the renders. And I just render out a square one and a wide one. And I'm just starting to round things up now. I'm starting to turn on my denoiser. I know that the render is coming, and that I'm getting quite close to it, so I start naming my cameras, setting up the denoiser. I usually just use denoiser as a bit of insurance anyway. It was a very lucky scene. There wasn't much noise at all, which was very nice. And I get lost in the lighting a little bit again. But I'm just going to round things up, because the image certainly doesn't really change now. I think I even go back to that first light. One thing I do towards the end, which I will talk about as well and go through, is I just clean everything up and name everything and name the lights. I tend to do this towards the end just so I can work without boxing myself in, especially with lights. If you call, a light your key light or your fill light, or make your lights identify something, I think that could help, but I also kind of know exactly what each light is doing. And, I've got a lot of different lights turned off there that are Gobo lights and whatnot. There's only 3 lights turned on, but it's not really till I'm certain, okay, the lighting's done, I'm not really changing it, that I'll call one light one thing and another light another thing and say, okay, well, this is clearly that fill light, this is that highlight, this is the Gobo light. I wouldn't recommend coming into lighting when you create a light and at first saying, this will be my key light, this will be my main light. Because I think if you light freely and you understand what you need to do to light, don't light from the front. Make sure your object pops. Make sure there's a lot of highlights on it. Make sure that, things are really popping out of the image. Sometimes you might put something in and think, this will be my key light. And then you mess with your lights a little bit and another light just takes over. So I think naming things towards the end is good. So here you can see a bit of scene cleanup. This is where I'm naming everything. Delete the old stuff out the scene that I'm not using. I delete the lights that I'm not using. And name the lights. So I kind of know that experimentation is done and the render's pretty much done. So I go through and I name everything, and then I group up the Megascans. A lot of the time I tend to leave the Megascans with the crazy long names they come with, because then I don't think there's any point trying to memorize which is which by calling them 1, 2, 3. Sometimes that works, I suppose. But I like leaving them in the long names because then you know where they are. And I've got that highlight again, this time on the front. And I end up getting rid of that by turning off visible and diffuse on one of the lights, which is not something you can get away with turning off in a lot of scenes, but I could get away with it here, which was really valuable to be able to do. I don't think it takes me very long to do it. I have a look at the Megascans, make sure that they're all obeying the light IDs, which I don't know why I was doing, because I know that it's nothing to do with the light ID. And I am trying to see if I can get around it just by moving the light quickly. I seem to have gotten around it a little bit, but then I've lost my highlight, which sent me into a fit of rage, as I love my highlights. I think it's just in a moment that I come into that, I realise what light is causing it. I realise it's this front light. And then I just try and turn off visible and diffuse. And I think the reason I didn't turn to trying to turn off visible and diffuse straight away is because most scenes you can't get away with it. Especially if, you know, all your objects are reflective. You got a lot of reflective objects in the scene. You know, you could turn it off and then it just looks like one of your objects just is not getting hit by the light, and then your objects both look disconnected. Oh yeah, so what I'm doing here, I'm just trying to add a fall off to see if I can get the fall off of the light to hit the top of the Xbox but not make its way down to the bottom. But again, I don't think that's going to work because it's coming from light bounces. It helped a little bit, and it probably looked alright, but there is that sense of unrealism. But then again, turn off visible and diffuse and it's gone, and I still have my highlight, which fixes that. So then I just turn off the fall off and reposition the light to where I like it. And that's pretty much it, and then I start rendering. So I hope that this provided a lot of value. I would assume that to some people this could be better than a tutorial, because when you see a workflow and you see somebody working and you see somebody thinking about things and creating things, I think that's really important. I'm definitely going to try and make more of these where I am just making a render. It's not me talking over it, but it's me making the render while I'm making it. I may have to get some reps in doing that though, because it's one thing to make a tutorial that you've prepared for and you know how to make, and that you've cut down the process and you've looked out for the problems and you know how to create that so people have a slick process to get the same result that you have. But then it's another thing to make a render from scratch and create a new idea and talk about it, as so much of your energy is on the whole process. I did it with that MacBook tutorial I made at the start of the year, or towards the end of last year, and it worked well, so I'll probably do that more as well. But I'm going to try and do more of these as well, as I'm always making renders through the week. So I'll just start recording them and talking over them so I have YouTube content. I hope you got a lot of value from this. I hope you saw a lot of things that might change the way you work, or solve some problems for you, or make you try a couple of new things. But this was good fun. And I'm certainly, although it was a bit of a back and forth with the process, a bit more than sometimes I like, it didn't take too long. It only took me just over an hour. So very happy with that. Really hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to check out my coaching. I do offer advanced coaching now as well. I used to, my main coaching is the main landing page that it will take you to is just for beginners, people that really need a solid foundation and a solid workflow. And that consists of about 24 calls over a couple of months, and going through modules that I've prepared to make sure your workflow gets put into a place very similar to mine. And then I have advanced coaching, which is with 10 calls, and that's more me helping you with your work and applying my way of working to it and straightening up your workflow, or helping you with things. So that's more for people that are creating pretty advanced renders, pretty good renders, or in a decent place. But either way, if you're curious, just book a call and we can discuss which one's right for you. If you're unsure, as my main coaching can still get a little bit advanced at points, but that's the point of it, is to make people advanced. And then of course I have my Patreon as well, so be sure to check that out. Definitely going to start uploading as much as I can over there. One thing I'm going to put on here is I did record an art process of me creating the echo.render. It's actually just an art process of me animating it. So I'm going to pop that on there probably the same day I upload this, which will be Friday. And be sure to go check that out. You can subscribe with a free trial and check everything out over there. But thank you for watching this. I do appreciate it if you made it all the way to here. And I hope you learned a lot and you saw a lot that is valuable to you and your workflow as an artist. So with that being said, I will see you in the next video.